So this is a quick takes. Is best practices when migrating to SharePoint Online. These are the topics we're going to be discussing using Azure Storage Pipeline versus CSOM, Azure Storage Pipeline versus CSOM, SharePoint Online throttling, and last but not least, managed metadata migration. So using Azure Storage Pipeline versus CSOM and private Azure Storage are two of the options that you can use when migrating to SharePoint Online. In our demo today, we're going to be using the private Azure storage. In essence, both are faster than the CSOM connection adapter. And in our demo today, you'll be able to see that. So going to Azure Storage Pipeline versus CSOM. In terms of speed, the difference you can see are 200 megabytes to 500 megabytes an hour on a single on-prem machine and 400 megabytes to 10 gigs an hour to Azure VMs. These also reflect based on how close the migrations are running to the SharePoint Online tenant. So here, just to save time, basically I ran one previously in CSOM. As you can see, it took 7 minutes and 29 seconds. The copy was a site copy going from a SharePoint 2013 on-prem site to SharePoint Online site. You could also do tenant migrations, which I'll show you a connection after. If we have time, we could probably do a migration for that as well. To get started, let's go ahead and begin. So if we do a copy site, and if you go here and you do paste site, paste all site content, and essentially if you want to do an Azure migration, the only option you really got to check if you're doing a Microsoft provided storage is you got to check the option right here. So in list content options and select the option use Azure SharePoint Online Container Office 365 upload. And basically if you don't have a private storage, you could just use the Microsoft provided storage and no additional configuration needs to be set. Just go ahead, hit yes there. And you also select that checkbox for the Microsoft provided storage. In our test today, we're not going to be selecting the bottom one because we have a private Azure storage. And I'll show you actually where the configuration settings are to be done for that. So within the configuration, if you go into the C drive, program data, metalogics, environment settings, the change you got to make is in the upload manager Azure storage connection string. And basically, if you have a private storage, you're going to have the account key, account name, basically input it into this key value right here. Alright, so that's the private storage we're going to be using today. And we're going to be selecting that option, and we're going to hit the Run button. So while this is running in the back, as promised, I'm going to show you also how to make a connection quickly. So if we go to Connect to SharePoint, so to here, I'm going to be doing a tenant connection. So basically, you got to specify the connection for the tenant. Okay. You got to specify the target type, which is an Office 365 tenant. As you'll see, the connection type, it'll automatically select the remote connection CSOM. And there are two types of authentication type that you use for the SharePoint Online. One of them is Office 365 ADFS authentication, and the second one is the web browser authentication. With the Office 365 web browser authentication, it's not really recommended, but if it's an option that you want to use, you may use that, but it does eventually time out. So if it does time out, the cookie expired, while the migration is running, you have to input the password again for the account, the migration account that you're using. So in this case, we're going to just use Office 365 standard. I'm going to input the username and the password. I'm going to hit OK. We're not going to be using the tenant, so no continue with connection. With the tenant connection, you could basically see all the subsites or all the site collections that are under that tenant. Also, in terms of speed to SharePoint Online, so based on before what I said, that the speeds, they could vary between 200 megs to 500 megs an hour on a single on-prem and 400 megs to 10 gigs an hour to Azure VMs. Basically, these can reflect based on if the migrations are running closer to the SharePoint Online tenant. Also, another point to mention, while the new API for the Azure API is faster for lists, items, and documents. In a range, you would not see the same speed for more complex site collections, sub-site structures, based on if they have a lot more larger managed metadata trees, more complex workflows, content types. As you can see, the uploading the Azure batch, so it's using that Azure. This is another thing you'll notice when using Azure. You'll notice in the job logs is that it's processing documents rather than copying documents. So that's another way to tell.
So as Bilal mentioned in the previous slides, we were talking about Azure Pipeline to CSOM, and he's demonstrating that. One issue one could run into is throttling. This is definitely not on our side, but with Microsoft. And one of the recommendations we do recommend is to use on Microsoft accounts. And as you can see in the second bullet point, we have been working with Microsoft and have done some behind-the-scenes work with them. And in build 8603, we have made some changes that would help mitigate the throttling. We can't guarantee that it would just totally stop, but there's been significant improvements. Bilal and I can both attest that we've gotten a decreased amount of help tickets regarding this. I just wanted to mention this is a factor, so we definitely recommend. We are now on version 8702, and the version that Bilal is on currently is 8701. And as you can see, it's going. It's actually completed the migration. So let's see how long I guess it took on this one compared to the CSOM migration.
So here is our paste all site content. The last one that I have highlighted here is, the Azure pipeline one that we use, and it completed in 5 minutes and 44 seconds, opposed to the CSOM adapter one. I didn't show that. My apologies. So if I go to change configuration, and we go to list content options. So if you go to list content option and you see that I had these unchecked while doing the migration, it took 7 minutes and 29 seconds. So in essence, about a minute and a half longer than the one that we currently ran.
Well, just one follow-up to that. Now, this was a significantly small migration. I believe you just did a site migration. There was 30 items in the document library. You'll see more significant impact when larger migrations are run. As you can see, there was a minute, 20-second difference on this.
SharePoint Online Throttling. To use an on-Microsoft account, basically, it would allow it to basically bypass ADFS or any MFS. Essentially, it would still be going through the ADFS, but not the ADFS sync, which is from the domain itself. As Vineet mentioned in 8603 is the changes we made to help with the throttling issues. If we go to manage metadata migration. So as I was showing, for managed metadata migrations, you'd have to connect to SharePoint Online tenant. For the term store, you need full access to the term store. So as you would need on-premise, the only difference actually on SharePoint Online is you would need to have global admin permissions. So if I go to the references right here, within our documentation, it lists right here that for full access to term store administrator for managed metadata services, as well as you need Office 365 global administrator and term store admin permissions.
Just one follow-up, and in this reference is major documentation that will definitely help is the second one, the SharePoint Online Migration Considerations for Maximum Performance. That does come with the content matrix version is downloaded. We have that as one of the files, so definitely recommend to review that for migration setup when migrating to SharePoint Online.
It's this file right here, so it's within the web setup it comes. So 8603's version right here. Here, I'll show you this. But it has it has a ton of information that's key when doing migrations to SharePoint Online. One of the questions I think if I didn't really mention in the beginning is if there's any difference when using the Microsoft provided storage opposed to the private Azure storage. There is one key difference. One is that one's free, and the private Azure storage is this one that you have to pay for. In performance, you'll see somewhat slightly much of a difference. The only reason is because with the Microsoft provided storage they're shared across tenancies. That's really the only difference you can maybe see. Other than that, it is much faster than the CSOM connection adapter.
Is there any way around the web browser authentication timeout?
Unfortunately, at the moment, there isn't. It works the same way as you would be connecting to the web browser. If there is any timeout for the web browser, if there isn't any, timeout for the web browser, then it would work the same way with Content Matrix tool. Does proxy slow down the migration process? I wouldn't believe so. I could probably confirm that, but from my knowledge, I've seen other customers use the proxy and it has not affected performance.
How to configure the Azure blob. For the private storage account, you would just create a storage account in your Azure VM. That's actually in that documentation that we've provided. And then once that account has been created, Bilal had already shown that once you get the default key and the Azure passkey, you would input it in the upload connection string in the environmental settings XML. There's a question, what about sites that are maybe 10 GB or 20 GB in size? Is there quicker methods of migrating them? Or sites with a structure of subsites within subsites?
For that, essentially, we say to break up the jobs. This also works with on-prem as well. Doing really large migrations, it can take an impact on performance. So we do recommend breaking up the jobs.
Is there a limit on major and minor versions when migrating from SharePoint 2010 to SharePoint Online?
I did see something in regards to a new thing for document libraries, but no, I don't believe there is any limit on major or minor versions.
Yeah, to Bilal's point, I don't believe there is either, but we can certainly confirm that as well.
For Microsoft Blob Azure, so it's within this file right here. It's located in the program data folder where the Metalogics tool is installed. It's in the environment settings XML file. It's a key called upload manager storage connection string, and that's where you place in the Azure private storage key. This is only for the private storage. So for the Microsoft provided storage, you don't have to configure anything. You could just leave it as blank. So if you just remove that and then you save it, you could just use the Microsoft provided storage.
Does Metalogic support any integrations with other scripts like PowerShell to automate migrations?
They do have a scheduling tool, so you could schedule it for current user and machine. You use it through task scheduler. You could also use it generate through PowerShell script, but I think that would probably be for another quick take, as it does appear to be seen as another out of the scope of SharePoint Online.